It was the first day of summer camp, and Anna stood by the lake, watching the sun paint the water gold. She hated swimming. Her mom always said, "Face your fears," but the water seemed so vast and cold. At lunch, she met Lily, who loved swimming but was terrified of heights. They traded stories, laughing until their fears felt smaller. That afternoon, Anna waded into the lake. The water was cold, but Lily cheered her on. Later, they climbed the tallest tree in the camp. Lily's hands trembled, but Anna held them steady. At the top, the view was breathtaking. Sometimes, courage grows best when shared. Leela always walked home the same way, past the bakery with its sweet aroma, through the park where children laughed, and along the creek with shimmering water. One day, her little sister Mia joined her. They stopped to watch a bird struggling in the water. "Let's help it," Mia said. Lila hesitated but agreed. They worked together, gently pulling the bird free. The bird fluttered away, but Mia was soaked. She laughed. "It's okay, Lila. Sometimes messy things make life better." Lila smiled, realizing Mia had taught her something profound. Kindness isn't always neat, but it always matters. Emma always carried her sketch pad, drawing things she dreamed of but never dared to try. One sunny afternoon, she watched a girl at the park fold paper swans. Her fingers moved like magic, transforming scraps into art. Curious, Emma asked to learn. She tried, but her swan crumpled. "It's okay," the girl said. "Your first won't be perfect." Emma smiled and tried again. Hours passed. Finally, she held a delicate swan. "See?" The girl grinned. "Mistakes don't mean failure. They mean progress." Emma went home, pulled out her sketches, and began painting her wildest dreams. Her fear wasn't failure. It was never trying. Sophie trained for months. Every morning she ran before sunrise, her breath fogging in the cold air. She pushed through exhaustion, dreaming of crossing the finish line first. On race day, she ran her fastest, but just before the end, she saw a girl limping. Without thinking, Sophie stopped, helped her up, and they finished together. She didn't win, but the crowd cheered louder for her than the winner. That day, she learned, sometimes the real victory isn't about being first, it's about lifting others along the way. She stood at the edge of the pool, her toes curling over the cold tile. The other girls were already diving in, sleek as seals. She hesitated, her heart pounding like a drum. "You'll sink," a voice in her head warned. She thought about quitting. She always did when things felt impossible. But then she saw a little girl by the bench, watching with wide, hopeful eyes. That was her once, dreaming of courage. Taking a breath, she jumped. The water was icy, shocking, but she swam. It wasn't perfect, but she didn't sink. Later, she realized, sometimes bravery is just showing someone else it's possible. Ella loved her kite. It was pink with silver stars, and she flew it every weekend. One windy afternoon, as the kite danced high above, the string snapped. Ella watched helplessly as it soared away. She chased it through the field, her heart sinking. Finally, she found it tangled in a tree, torn and lifeless. She cried, thinking it was ruined. But as she sat beneath the tree, a little girl approached. Her eyes lit up at the sight of the kite. Ella handed it over, smiling. That day, she realized something surprising. Sometimes letting go brings more joy than holding on. She sat on the park bench, tying her little sister's shoe. The girl had fallen moments ago, tears streaming down her dirt-streaked cheeks. "It's okay," she said softly. "Falling happens." They stayed there a moment, watching other kids play. "But they're all running," the little one whispered, ashamed. Her older sister smiled, brushing her hand across her shoulder. "Everyone falls," she said. "What matters is who gets up." The girl nodded, determined. She stood, took 2 steps, and stumbled again. But this time she laughed. Life isn't about staying on your feet. It's about finding joy and learning to rise. Emma had always been afraid of the ocean, As a child, she watched her sister dive into the waves while she stayed on the shore, toes barely touching the water. One day, her sister handed her a surfboard. "Just try," she said. Heart pounding, Emma paddled out. A wave rose behind her. She panicked, fell, then floated. The water held her. She laughed. Fear had never been the ocean's fault. It had been her own. Sometimes the things we fear aren't really dangerous. They're just waiting for us to trust them. I once saw a little girl, maybe 7, struggling with a kite on a windy beach. Her hair whipped around her face as she fought to keep the string from tangling. "It won't fly!" she cried, stomping her foot. A woman, likely her mother, smiled and knelt beside her. "You're pulling too hard. Let the wind do the work." The girl loosened her grip, hesitated, then watched as the kite soared high. Sometimes we cling tightly to control, thinking effort is the key. But life, like that kite, often takes flight when we loosen our grip. Control isn't strength. Trust is. Sophie always carried her violin to the park, her fingers gliding over the strings as children played and birds chirped. One day, she noticed Emma, a quiet girl sketching under the old oak tree. Sophie smiled and played a soft tune. Emma looked up, her pencil pausing, and slowly began to draw Sophie and her violin. Weeks passed, and the two became friends. Sophie learned Emma had never spoken since losing her parents. One afternoon, as Sophie played a lively piece, Emma whispered, "Thank you." Sophie froze, stunned. The moral? Sometimes music and friendship can unlock voices we thought were lost forever. Rain splattered the window. Maya hated rainy days. Everything felt gray. Even her bright pink boots seemed dull. She watched a girl outside, Sarah, always smiling, even in the downpour. Maya wondered how. Sarah skipped, splashing in puddles. Pure joy. Maya scoffed. So childish. She preferred staying dry, inside, safe. But then Sarah tripped, fell hard. Maya gasped. She expected tears. Instead, Sarah laughed, got up, muddy but still smiling. Maya finally understood. The rain wasn't the problem, it was how you chose to dance in it. Joy isn't about perfect weather, it's about finding the fun, even when you fall. Sheila was always last to be picked for games. One day, as her classmates laughed at her missed catch, she simply walked away. She found a quiet bench under an old oak tree and began sketching. The swirls of her pencil captured her frustration, but soon transformed into something beautiful, a girl soaring through the sky, untouched by jeers. The next day, her sketchbook caught a teacher's eye. Within weeks, her drawings were on the school walls, admired by all. Sometimes, Sheila thought, being on the field isn't the only way to shine. Life's applause often finds us in unexpected places. She always ran, barefoot, across the meadow behind her house. The grass tickled her toes, the sun kissed her cheeks, and the wind carried her laughter. One day she found a small, broken bird in the grass. Its wing bent awkwardly. She scooped it up, whispered soft promises, and spent weeks nursing it. When it finally flew away, her heart swelled with pride. Years later, she saw a girl alone in a crowded room. She smiled, started a conversation, and gave her kindness. The girl blossomed, like the bird once had. Sometimes the smallest acts heal the deepest wounds, yours and theirs. When Ella was young, she spent hours arranging rocks by the river. She believed it was all about perfection, placing each stone just right. But no matter how carefully she arranged them, they always tumbled down. One day, tired of the effort, she left the rocks scattered. To her surprise, the next morning, a beautiful pattern had formed, more stunning than anything she had planned. She learned that sometimes, the best things happen when we stop trying so hard to control them. Life, like the river, flows best when we let it, Emma had always been afraid of water. At every pool party, she stayed on the edge, watching others dive in. One day, her little sister slipped near the deep end. Without thinking, Emma jumped. She didn't drown. She swam. Fear had kept her still for years, but when it mattered, she moved. Later, she laughed. The thing she feared most had saved someone she loved. Sometimes the only way to overcome fear is to forget it for just one moment. And in that moment, you might discover you were capable all along. Sheila loved her garden. Each morning she knelt in the dirt, tending to her blooming flowers. Her favorite was a tiny rose bush, frail and thorny, tucked in the corner. "It's hopeless," her neighbor said. Sheila just smiled. Weeks passed, and the rose bush remained stubborn. Yet Sheila watered it faithfully. One day, as the sun broke through the clouds, a single perfect rose appeared. Her daughter, watching, whispered, "It's beautiful." Sheila replied, "Some things bloom when they're ready, not when we expect." Sometimes the twist in life is realizing patience isn't for the flowers, it's for us. Sarah trained for months to run a marathon. Every morning she ran past the bakery, breathing in the warm scent of fresh bread. She imagined crossing the finish line, triumphant. On race day, she pushed through the pain, step by step, but at mile 20, she collapsed. Tears welled up. Then a girl handed her a water bottle. "You got this," she said. Sarah stood up and walked. Not the victory she planned, but she finished. She had chased strength but found kindness instead. Winning wasn't the goal. Getting back up was. She sat on the bench, sketchbook in hand, drawing the lake's rippling surface. Ella, a young girl with dreams of being an artist, spent every afternoon here. "Why do you always draw the same lake?" a passerby asked. She smiled, pointing to the water. "It's never the same. The sunlight, the wind, even the reflections, everything changes." One day, a sudden rainstorm ruined her drawing. Ella stared at the soaked pages, her work erased. She laughed instead of crying. "The rain painted its own story," she said. Life, like the lake, is ever-changing. The twist? Sometimes the imperfections hold the most beauty.